and we're checking on everything. All right, here we go. All right, good morning, everyone. We got a full house. Any new people haven't been in a meeting lately, or? Yep, and we got a few. Perfect. Well, thank you for coming. Hopefully you'll find this entertaining and maybe learn a few things too. I'm Art Dutra. I'm the superintendent for Nutmeg Division right now. And we have the screen scrolling there, so you guys should know most of this now. We'll go through a quick bunch of announcements, and then we'll get into our clinics. And then we'll take our break, and we have 2 layout tours today. All right, member showcase. Please, if anybody's working on anything and you just like to share it with the membership, no matter how insignificant you think it is, it's worth sharing it. Somebody will learn something out of it. So I use myself again. For the New England RPM meet, I started working on some Tilcon aggregate cars off the prototypes. They're back on the table there. The Tan Ortner car is all finished up, including graffiti. That's a new one for me. That was my first attempt at doing graffiti on a box car. I think it came out pretty good. I will probably do a clinic coming up on that. The other ones that are on the table back there that are starting in process is I have the 3-bay 70-ton Canadian National hoppers that Tilcon purchased a bunch of those secondhand. I'm in the process of renumbering those now, and then they'll start with a fade, then patch, then decal it for the new reporting marks, and then we'll start the weathering process on that one. And then there's also an Ortner FEC car back there that Tilcon had purchased a large block of FEC cars. If anybody wants to model those Tilcon cars that are the ex-FECs, I'll just let you know right now, Walters is releasing another release of those exact cars, 3 road numbers. They're due out this fall. So either get your order into a local hobby shop now or watch when they become available and pick those up because they're hard to find. I found one on eBay, the one I have back there now from a previous run, but it'll save you a ton of work because it's already lettered. And if you look at some of the prototype pictures I have back there, one of the signatures is that Tilcon wasn't very fussy about patching out, and there's a lot of bleed through. You can see the FEC reporting marks bleeding through their patch out paint. So it's nice to get it already pre-lettered, and if you want to do that, you know, fade through look, it'll be real easy to do it that way. So that's what I'm working on. I'll do a couple of clinics on that down the road, and that's going to dovetail in with, I'm working on a sectional display layout that'll be 2 feet by 12 feet, which will depict a section of the airline branch of the Providence and Worcester, which is where those aggregate cars spend a lot of time up at the Durham Wallingford facility there for Tilcon. All right, we're in the fall season. It's convention season right now. If you haven't signed up for the NER convention, you should do that pretty soon. It's in Rochester this year. Prices go up very soon. Again, get the most out of your NMRA memberships. The Discord channel is a great place to go. There's a lot of people posting what they're working on, how they do modeling techniques. There are chat rooms there where you can set up and open up and other modelers can jump in and you can discuss a topic of your choosing. There's a lot of good stuff there. There's no political like dealing with some of the other public social media platforms. So it's a nicer way to go. Don't forget the partnership program. We're approaching, I believe, 40 manufacturers now that give you a discount on your NMRA membership. So anything you purchase, if you buy enough stuff, you're going to basically pay, you know, your membership in the NMRA for the year in the savings you'll get from these manufacturers. There's some really good ones out there. One that I wanted to touch base on real quick was for the handful of us that are like over 65 now. I'm not quite there yet, but They have a new partner with the NMRA that basically pays you money just for going in, signing up as a member, and it's basically encouraging you to do things socially. So all you gotta do is put, hey, I went to the NMRA Nutmeg Division meeting every month, and they will pay you for those, or hey, I went to an operating session at a friend's house. Because again, the whole idea is, as we age, social interaction is really important to basically your health. So you're gonna get free money just for enjoying your hobby here.
In addition to that, they will pay up to $100 of your membership. The only thing is you have to make sure that your particular Advantage plan does cover, it's called Grouper.
Yes, the platform is Grouper.
There's a couple of cards on the table that you can go and check. Unfortunately, I tried, my Advantage covered, so I'm out of luck. But I do know a number of our members have already applied, and they've already gotten their checks and whatnot. I will be sending a note at some time to Gordy to ask them to have the program changed slightly so that we can start getting additional members. Because right now, this is only for members. If you are not a member, there's no way for you to find out if your particular Advantage plan would cover it. And if that's the case, I know a number of people that, hey, they cover it, I'm going to join. So I'm going to be sending Gordy a request to maybe have that changed slightly, where you don't have to be a member to find out if you would be covered.
Very nice. Thanks, Ron. Okay, one of the other things here is we've got 2 clinics today, and if you're interested in ever presenting to the membership here at a meeting, our clinic coordinator is Dave Yale, and all you have to do is drop him an email, and he'll work out getting you slotted into the schedule for one of our meetings. Can be any topic you want. Could be a particular prototype railroad that you want to discuss, that you're modeling, modeling techniques, you name it. Anything that the division might be interested in, we're very happy to have those clinics to present. Another issue is if you'd like to get some of your modeling efforts showcased out there, Mike Wheeler is our social media coordinator back there. An email just went out recently with the information to contact Mike, send him videos, send him pictures. Contact Mike, he can take care of that, and we'll get you out there on the Nutmeg social media pages, get you some mileage. We're over 460?
400, Facebook's over 600,
Yep.
Instagram's 400, YouTube is only 160, so videos are great.
Yep. It's a good thing, and again, we're also linked in with NMRA, so a lot of that stuff gets reposted by NMRA National, so then you'll get even more mileage out of it, so it's a great way to go. And lastly, we have the 2 layout tours today. If anyone has layouts and you'd be interested in hosting the group after one of our meetings, Don White back there would be the person to contact, and he will gladly slot you in. Your layout doesn't have to be finished. It can be under construction. A lot of people like to see the construction techniques going on, talk to the people about any roadblocks they ran into or problems that they've solved. So any stage on a layout, any size. I mean, we've had Kaylee Zhang in the past, and her layout was, you know, a very small layout that was under construction. Again, you're going to learn something, and it's good talking to the host. It's a good time. All right. The regional, everybody should know that you can get the Coupler magazine, or you should be getting it in PDF form online every quarter. The Coupler is in need of articles. If you want to do a how-to article or something like that, they're always looking. Contact Coupler site, look for the editor, and send them an email, and they'll get you hooked up on what you need to do to put an article together. if you are considering working on your Master Model Railroader certification, you can get one of your certs covered by doing enough articles for that, for your either volunteer if they're going into the couple of. So let's see what else. The region is looking for a social media coordinator up there too. So if you are tech savvy and you want to be able to post stuff like Mike's doing, the region would also like to have someone doing that as well. I had already mentioned the conventions coming up, and I also mentioned the partnership program. Okay, not too early to remind everybody, Amherst is coming up in January. A big thing this year that was discussed recently was that this is the 90th anniversary for the NMRA, and they are planning to do a kickoff at the Amherst Train Show, and it's going to be a year-long celebration by the NMRA. They have not released any details yet, but they've got some stuff planned for us. The regional convention this year, like I said, is in Rochester, New York. If you have major reservations, it would be a good time to do it. And we have a couple of local train shows here. This one is the New Haven Historical Society and Modelers Group. They're doing their reunion and train show on September 14th. It's going to be down there in Essex. They're doing a couple of member-only events too. They've got rear mileage charter train going out, and they're also getting a tour of their roundhouse facility. So if you'd like to partake in those, you would have to join the Historical Society.
You can join that day.
Yes, you can join that day.
$40, and it's really it was kind of been a sort of a sleepier event in the last years. We have a new president, Chris Adams, who hosted us at the steam train, I think in February,
yes.
And made a presentation. And he's injected a lot of life into this organization. And one of the things we're doing is really ramping up this event, opening it up to the world for $5. As I mentioned, join the organization and you get the shop tour and you have opportunity to take a rear mileage train trip, I think down to Old Saybrook.
Yep.
The other things that are really neat, I don't know if any of our New Haven people, but Jack Swanberg will be talking at the dinner that evening. He is author of New Haven Power, and he is the authority on the New Haven Railroad. Jack has got to be 88 years old, maybe still sharp as a tack, but he won't be with us forever. If any of you ever wanted to see or meet Jack, he will be talking at the dinner that evening. The dinner that evening costs $40, and they take reservations for the dinner only through tomorrow. So if you're interested, there are a number of these flyers go around the table. We recommend that you look into it. There will be a second day for people that are spending overnight or live in the area. There will be layout tours on Sunday morning. Two of them are particularly good. Bob Murphy's New Haven, I think it's 50s, 60s layout, very large open aisleways. And the other one is Chris Adams' Valley Local, which if any of you have seen it, is quite famous now nationally. A very, very nice look at the Valley line running from Old Saybrook, essentially up along the Connecticut River. Beautiful, beautiful layout, operates well, and it represents that line in October of 1948. The last of the steam is still running, and it's in the fall. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Old Saybrook is fully represents the interchange there, and it's a great layout. Okay. I think that covers it all, but if you have any questions, see me. Like I said, there's a flyer over there. There's a website. If you get into the New Haven Railroad Technical and Historical Association, we call it NERSA. I don't know how that, Took me a long time to figure that out. But in any event, go onto the site and look under the events section, and all the details are there. Any questions this evening?
Yep.
Where are?
Yeah, and if anybody doesn't follow Chris Adams's work, he's on the Valley Local blog. If you look it up online, it'll show what he's working on. Right now, he's working on Middletown, I believe, is his biggest project right now. All right, we've got 2 clinics coming up here in a minute, and first is going to be for Mark Osmun on Going Guilford. He's going to talk about his modeling efforts there. And then we have Justus, and he will be doing his automated doors on the roundhouse here. So we've got a nice technology event for you there. And then this afternoon, we have the 2 layout tours. First one is Mike Wachowski's here, Corkscrew and Vineyard Railroad. Again, both of these roads are not handicapped accessible. And the second one is John Cavanaugh, which is the Gray Granite Railroad. If you're not aware, this is a 1-to-1 full-size railroad. John's got himself a 25-ton Plymouth, I think, or Wickham engine, and he's working on restoring a Porter steam locomotive right now. This one is actually a fee because John's opening up outside of his normal operating hours. So it's $20 per person. If anybody would actually like to run the diesel locomotive on his trackage down there, he's asking $100 to cover fuel and insurance costs. But it should be a real good one to see what this guy's doing. He's got a large orchard out there. In the falls, he runs a lot of trains out from his retail facility out into the orchard for the kids for pumpkin patch rides and things like that. He's got 2 cabooses and an open car out there. So that should be an interesting one for somebody who's playing in the 1-to-1 scales. Any questions?
Minimum of 5 people.
Yeah, we needed a minimum of 5 people. And I believe we're right at 5 now. Yes?
Yeah, my layout is going to be open, and actually it's at 1 o'clock, but I'm leaving here directly, and I know people might want to get to John's place. So, you know, from like 12 o'clock on, you know, as soon as I leave here, I'm going to leave the house, open up the layout. So if anybody wants to come early, then that would be, you know, fine with me.
Excellent, thank you, Mike. Yes, Gray Granite, normally you can go to the layout tours in any order you'd like. Gray Granite, he's opening for us at 3 o'clock. So if you're going to that one, so go to Mike's first, as he just said, he'll be open right after lunchtime probably. And do that one first, and then the Gray Granite will be the second one. I believe, oh, we dropped one slide there. One other one I will talk about real quick too is there's a new train show that'll be starting this fall. A lot of us missed the old Cheshire train show. I guess the people at Cheshire have decided they are not going to restart the Cheshire train show. So a group of area modelers have gotten together, and they're going to have a new train show this fall in Wilcox Tech in Meriden, literally about 10 minutes from where the Cheshire facility was. And I believe it's September 29th, which is a Sunday. Setup is on Saturday. The organizers have even said they're entertaining, actually letting people like operate any modular clubs that are coming to set up to operate on Saturday once they're set up. So if they want to do informal run sessions, so that's a nice thing for any modular groups out there that want to display. It'll be full vendor room, and hopefully we can get them off to a good start for their inaugural year here. And again, back to the New Haven Historical Society show, it's $5. You can't beat it. I know one of the vendors that's going to be there is Rapido. They'll be showing off their latest projects. So you can't beat getting a peek at the Rapido products that are coming down the pike for $5. All right, we'll take a quick break, and then we'll get on to the first presenter here. Okay, we're back in it now. We're going to turn it over to Mike for the first presentation.
Hey everyone, see some familiar faces and friends. Thanks for coming out today. And going to talk about the layout. So after we're modeling anything goes, I was going to narrow my focus into Guilford transportation industries from 1983 to 1988. And here's how I did it and what I uncovered doing it, what I learned. If it'll run.
Move the cursor onto the presentation, just click it, make it what you saw.
There it comes. From the humble beginnings, in Labor Day weekend 1984, we drove the Studo Golden Spike to the current iteration of our basement layout. My father was was the actual constructionist of it. He built it, and he, my brother, and I were operators on it. And even then, this photo dates from 1980. But even then, you could tell that we had some Guilford stuff on it. These are pre-commercial models. That's a Athearn Blue Box U28 that my father converted for me into the E15B, and then a Blue Box Athearn High Nose GP9 that he converted into a Chopped Nose GP7. As I mentioned, at the time we were doing anything goes, term that my friend gave me. My father was big into it, and then in the 90s, got really interested in modern mill operations. We had my brother and I with Guilford and B&M. We even had some proto-freelance stuff in there from my father's original layout back in the early 70s for the airline, which was a kind of a freelance Penn Central type thing. So even some chassis in there as well, and some seaboard. Just some scenes of some basic scenery. I took over the airline concept from my father and was modeling that for a while until I moved out for a few years. And then we ended up getting together, friends of ours who were big Guilford fans from Massachusetts to come down. We have operating sessions, 2 years from my friend Bill. We mix all our equipment together and just really run the energy out of the place. Right? Operate till we were falling asleep, and it would take 3 days to put the layout back to the way my father would have it when we were done. Good times. So why change? Why change a good thing? To begin with, despite running the perimeter of the walls, it's not enough run for me. How big of a layout do I need? As big as I can get. I mean, the current trend is, smaller shelf layout, whatnot, smaller switching layouts. That's good, but I mean, I'm a road freight guy. So another reason that my brother and I both married for a while, and then we moved out. We had our own places, and the layout ended up sitting for a long time. It got dirty. The solder joints got dirt in them. They ended up with a lot of bad continuity. It took the entire summer of 2016 to get the layout relatively reliably functioning again. And if I'm going to correct that issue, then I felt the best way to do that would be to run a bus line under the entire thing. If I'm going to run a bus line under the entire thing, then I may as well convert to DCC. If I'm converted to DCC, I got to get rid of all that rest track. If I'm get rid of the track, I may as well heat you over Bedford and finish the basement. So there we are. And then, of course, my father built, he was big into hosting Cedarville Division of NMRA for a long time. And then when he cut back from NMRA, he became a member of Valley HO Track, and he hosted meetings twice a year at the house for those guys. So we ended up with the current iteration of the layout because he got rid of the peninsula that we used to have in the middle of the big main room in the basement, so he could fit 20 guys over to have meetings. So we ended up with just a narrow shelf, just wide enough for a double-track main line, and then where there's yards, it bumps out to 50 classification yards. I joked recently that I have a 2-track racetrack and 4 pit areas. Also, another reason is because I've been inspired by some incredible layouts. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but Ray Schofield would get together in the spring with a number of area layouts in the Blackstone Valley area and Cape Cod, a little bit in Rhode Island. One of the layouts that's been on the tour in the past is Wally Brady's Canadian National Plymouth. And my one time there I was very impressed. The finished basement, he had wonderful looking, very tasteful display cabinets for all the equipment that wasn't on the layout. It was scenic, it ran well. Yeah, it definitely made a lasting impression on me. Another one you guys might know from YouTube is John Parker's BNSF Fall River South. Then there's the Lehigh and Keystone Valley layout in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. This one's open to the public. They have monthly operating sessions. You can go to their website and find out when they're doing those. They do predominantly the anthracite roads between 65 and 76, just before Conrail. Very well done layout. I actually got to operate it a number of times. Everybody's favorite OC, Dave Averly's Conrail Onondaga Cutoff. Just as a little anecdote, the first time I saw it on Facebook, it had no information on it. It was just a photograph of a New York Central signal bridge at a grade crossing, and I knew exactly what he was modeling, just from that one photo. Wasn't even a train in it. And of course, many others as well. Again, getting back to the track, I mean, it looked straight when he put it down. You got the brass track from '84. It's a DC layout, as I mentioned. So we had a lot of DPDTs, double pull, double throw. It's very rustic. So making the change. Some of the things that stuck in my head for 40 years were the B&M hopper cars, specifically the Morrison Knudsen rebuilt ballast cars. I know Dave Barlow at Perkins Road Depot did those and took bash. So those were some of the first cars that I bought to upgrade the railroad to make the change, to show the reflection. Tangent hoppers are taking care of the Keystone. Of course, the box cars I remembered. Another one of the first purchases I made when I started narrowing my focus and specifically doing Guilford were the former Rock Island B&M cars. And Exactrail actually did a number of numbers that B&M ended up with. It was a quick patch change using B&M blue and some decals. While Tangent does the D&H grain hoppers, that's actually a Bell product on an old Athearn blue box, the roundhouse box cars, and the Athearn Genesis cars as well. The roundhouse cars are actually better represented by the Athearn Pullman Standard 5044, but I learned that these cars are good, the roundhouse cars are good, if you make them into the 80,000 series and you put cushion draft gears on them. What I already happen to own, I know it's tough to see in this room because you could only go out and my father would see off to work. A lot of times you end up putting your pouring rain. But of course, the recognizable, easily recognizable Guilford box cars, and then the PFE 57-foot mechanical reefers. And just by happenstance, I happen to have one that actually matched in the photo I had. Not necessarily the car number, but certainly the lettering and the paint scheme. The Centralia models, NE5, they actually made 401. We actually fought one day off the Guilford Bridge. And of course, you can never have too many home run cars, especially the main central box cars. They were dozens and dozens in every train. So what did I need to add? I needed to add tank cars. I had a severe lack of fuel oil carrying tank cars. The roundhouse car is a pretty decent stand-in. Walther's car is a good car, I'm told. And auto racks. Auto racks are almost as ever present as the main central and the B&M and the D&H box cars. I also need to add coil steel cars. You can't really see it. It's buried here at the edge of the photograph, but predominantly Conrail, Penn Central, hanging on Penn Central. But definitely the Conrail cars and C&O in chassis for coil steel cars. And TOFC. The layout back in the day, and for those of us who have been modeling for a long time know that the Athearn Blue Box 86-foot flat car wasn't exactly the best running piece of rolling stock. Now with the Atlas cars and the Walther's cars, they've got metal parts on them. They track a lot better. They roll a lot better with the RP25 metal wheel sets. So I'll be adding TOFC more often. And then we can see KCS box cars. I actually happen to have a few in my collection, so they were able to stay on the layout. The research, I used books, I used DVDs and videos, magazine articles from the era, and of course our own photographs and videos that we took back in the day. And I am very fortunate that I have some very knowledgeable sources that hung out on Guilford at East Deerfield for 20 to 30 years, and the employees told them all kinds of stuff. So all I got to do is bring my buddy up and say, hey, what's the answer for this? Evolution of rolling stock through the 80s. I say 8 years, even though I'm only modeling 5, because the first picture predates the Boston and Maine purchase by Tim Mellon. But we see 40-foot Canadian Pacific boxcars in there. Then later in 1984, the state of Maine flood door cars, the 50-foot BAR cars are still in service here and there. In the spring of 87, we can see it's predominantly per diem cars that are roaming around and TOFC. And then in January of 88, we can see that the center beam cars are kind of coming along for lumber. And the COFC, the container on flat car as well. Here's another good example of what was rolling through East Deerfield at the time in summer of 87. We have our newsprint cars, Canadian Pacific newsprint cars. They were everywhere. We can see a whole string of home road cars in the foreground. Again, they're the Exact Rail, Athearn models. Plenty of center flow cars for pellets, plastic pellets, and other bulk commodities. We can see some fuel oil tank cars in there. There's open hoppers for coal that would go interchange to the central Vermont and go down to Amherst College for the power plant, as well as going east to Portland, Maine. And there's southern box cars in there. You might pick out some cotton belt double doors in there, or lumber cars, as well as the Southern Pacific version as well. Another shot from another day. See some more cabooses, B&M green car. We see a Rapido makes the model, that is. Canadian Pacific cylindrical hopper. There is a Chicago and Eastern Illinois box car in there as well. The D&H of New York cars that Katie makes. High Cube Burlington Northern car in there as well. Some more X-Rock cars. Some patched out rail box cars in the background. And again, more tank cars and covered hopper center flows. Okay. There's also the variety in locomotives. The stuff that the V&M had new, stuff that they got secondhand, SD26s from Santa Fe that got repainted. Of course, the hand-me-down D&H Alcos from former Lehigh Valley units. I estimate that there's roughly 21 different paints between the maroon and gold, 3 different versions of blue, 2 different versions of Guilford gray and orange, depending on whether waterville painted them or neon painted. The Norfolk and Western black, which were on the former Illinois Terminal SD39s when the V&M got them. Detroit Edison, which would be the MD demonstrator scheme, silver. Delaware and Hudson Lightning Stripe, their solid blue, solid yellow nose, and the Tiger Stripe version, X-Redding, actually on Hudson River was rolling around until 1984, et cetera, et cetera. Former Southern units on the SD45s. So of course I gotta have it. Some more of the models, some former Penn Central ex-Conrail units there in the top right. Detroit Addison U30, the only one on the roster, bottom right. Ex-Rock Island U25Bs, which were announced by Rapido. That's a Bowser model in the photo. You can tell the difference between the Redding and the D&H solid blue and the lightning stripe in the top left. There's our D&H 401 in the Lehigh and Hudson River. D&H Jars 36, GP 38s, et cetera, et cetera. That was an actual move. I didn't just pose that for photographs. That was the hostler actually moving those engines. The Gray Ghost, when the D&H ran out of blue paint. I mentioned the former Santa Fe SD26s, the Bicentennial RS3U, and the U23s that went to Maine Central to infuse the D&H with cash until Guilford purchased them. And of course, let's not forget the leased and the borrowed power, the stuff that was kept on the train. Norfolk and Western ran through a lot in Buffalo. A lot of times the stuff would run through the Bennington, sometimes even all the way through to Deerfield. Southern units as well. In January of '85, a pair of Southern SD40-2s ran all the way through at least to Lowell, Massachusetts, be further east. Pittsburgh and Lake Erie units would come in on the coal trains for Bow, New Hampshire, and run all the way through. That includes the firstly U28Bs and secondly GP38s and GP38-2s. CP rail units in the Action Red with the multi-mark. We're talking RS-18s, RS-18s, M424s. Vermont Railway, predominantly during the biggest strike in 86, 87-ish. They would be borrowed to get stuff down the north end of the D&H between Whitehall and Mechanical. Bangor and Aroostook, railroad historians know that B&O would lease out their power whenever and wherever, and a lot of times stuff was GP38s we were seeing on Guilford during that time between 83 and 88. 84 and 87 come to mind. Of course, Conrail units, not just going through to both Bow and Mount Tom coal plants, but also units were leased from time to time as Guilford needed extra power. New York, Susquehanna, and Western C430s would run a lot between Bennington and Buffalo. I just learned since I started putting this program together, as well as when the FRA hit Guilford hard, SD45s would run through on the B&M, at least to Deerfield and maybe further east as well. And that did continue post-D&H bankruptcy into CP era, when they did 261 intermodal all the way through to air from Bennington. There's also video footage of Union Pacific SP Family, and Canadian National on YouTube, and in some of the books as well that show those. So naturally, we reflect that on the layout. We have our CP rail line 424, our Falcon Western Power, pair of Southern SD40-2 on the wall, P&LE unit borrowed for a general freight. And one of the things that always needs to be drilled into me, because I like to take shortcuts, is model from photographs. And especially Guilford, because every locomotive had its own idiosyncrasy. We can see the 1568 at Deerfield. There's no number on the cab. It was in the process of being changed over to an SC number. We never got around to it. It got retired like that. D&H 658 actually was its third number. It started as the 758. It got renumbered to 652 to make room for the SD26s, and then it got renumbered to 658 until it got its Guilford Phase 2 paint. The only ID were the number boards. The only place it carried numbers. On the main central U18Bs, kind of hard to see it here in our photo. Well, actually, we're going to get to that. Getting ahead of myself. Here we can see a little better. Lack of numbers on the sides, which is FRA defects. U18Bs, as I started to mention, because they're small units, they only carry brake shoes on brake clasps on the insides of the bumper trucks, not on the outsides like other units, like on your 38s and your heavier horsepower units. When they were repatching stuff and repainting things, we can compare. The ST26 was the former Main Central 569, which was transferred to Delaware and Hudson very early on. So it was D&H 569. All they did at Oneonta was paint out the Delaware and Hudson markings and the number on the cab, relettered it to ST26. A keen eye will discern the different shade of gray on it, where it was faded versus fresh, in comparison to the freshly painted ST28 next to it. Again, paying attention to the details. The D&H U33Cs, the D&H would often swap out trucks as they needed to rebuild, and they didn't mind if they were mismatched between Adirondack and GSC. As such, both trucks on the 662 on the left need to be GSC, and the rear one on the 659 on the right needs to be a GSC. So I have to change 3 sets of side frames eventually when I can find GSCs. While we might be in a golden age of model railroading now, there's still some improvements that need to be made depending on how serious of modeling you want to reflect. As such, the Atlas U33Bs from a couple of years ago, their most recent release, they did a combination of Phase 1, Phase 2 paint. Phase 1 is Waterville. It gets the white stripes on the ends, and it gets a lot of stickers along the sills. Atlas did not do that. They used the colors of the Phase 1, which were more mundane, dulled down, versus the bright orange of the Oneonta repaints. So a real easy fix was just yank the details off, put some white stripe decals on, and then I'm going to paint the stack to look a little bit more weathered than the bright silver on it. And then the details went back on. A lot of the model manufacturers and the modelers get this wrong when they do a Guilford boxcar. They do the ends black. They weren't black, they were Guilford gray. So that's also a simple fix. Mask off the boxcar, give it a couple coats of Guilford gray. Don't even get me going about the auto racks 1983 to 1988. That is a clinic in and of itself. There's no rhyme or reason. There's no uniformity. A lot of them are shielded open cars that were still in service at the time. They got fiberglass sides. guys determined that the fiberglass sides would fall off or get damaged, so they started going to the steel sides, which are more akin to what you see out there on the rails today. Whether there was a smooth deck or there was a rib deck on the cars, et cetera, et cetera. Bi-level, tri-level. And we can kind of see there, but that next one will give us a little better view. The car that is just peeking up in the foreground is a good representation by Roca models. It is the safe pack car with a slightly little back date or slightly little forward dating them. You can take the roof off. I cut my tri down to a bi, and I paint out a little bit of lettering, pop off the UTI tag, and made it much better reflect the air that I model. We have one of our fiberglass sides. We have an intermountain car here with the stamped steel, which Plano makes the sides for that. You can change out your Walthers car if you want to mill out the sides of the solid Walthers cars. You can do that, put the Plano sides on. You can take the roof and the ends off of an intermountain car and make those as well. And Athearn Genesis here in the background with the Southern car as well. So, you know, no rhyme or reason. Nobody makes Fords. Guilford hauled Fords to air. Fords, Lincolns, Mercuries. The best I can do are the Atlas Ford Fairmonts. And now, one of the improvements was to upgrade my fleet, modify the fleet. Added to the NMRA cylinder, sometimes a little bit heavier. Boosters, minimum of 5 ounces, it doesn't matter. And as I'm doing the wheels, I decided to settle on intermountain wheels, most reliable for me of all the metal wheels that I do some to layout. So it's my preference. It's what I decided to invest in. And I was happy changing them over both intermountain wheels, the RP25, 110 tread, because as you saw the track work is not friendly. Doesn't play like we need it. So 110 tread for that. And as I'm doing wheel sets one day, I was like, these are flatback. Wheels aren't flatbacks. So I had an exact rail car upside down, and I said, oh, these have a nice contour back. I like that. I could get packages of wheels from Exact Rail. But after the third or fourth package of wheels from Exact Rail, I was having problems with derailments, scratching my head. So I put the gauge on it, and they were gauging too wide. Got a hold of the company. Customer service there was great. They worked with me. I was able to send packages of wheel sets back and forth. And then they were like, well, they gauge fine. I was like, how can they gauge fine? Obviously, it's sent photos, gauged on my wheel gauge, the NMRA gauge. They're wide. So, well, you know, we're using a phase 4 wheel gauge, and they're gauging fine. Yeah, and the phase 4 gauge, which flexes, they gauged fine. On the phase 2 gauge, that's older than I am, they were too wide, they were tight. Well, ultimately we hit an impasse. And I said to myself, man, if Intermountain would just make contour back wheels, well, guess what? That following Springfield, they did. So that's my go-to now. I do the called Intermountain high detail wheels. Again, I still use the 110 tread, but I'm very pleased. They're reliable as flatbacks. I'm a happy camper. Fortunately, they're hard to keep in stock, so I have to constantly wait for them to be available on the market again. And like I said, I'm switching over all my KD number 5s to the semi-scale 58. Boy, was KD mad when they called them semi-scale Springfield show. He said, no, they're a tail. And I was like, I got a number of friends that beg to differ, but okay. Again, at or exceeding the NMRA weights for standards, for car weighting, and weathering as well. This is an Athearn blue box. I actually put some Exact Rail crossovers on it as well to give it a little more detail. And I'm painting the wheels as well. And I've been making myself crazy since 2020. Those are details west, angle cocks, and arrows with brackets. They're still in that form. I still haven't gotten to put them on the E&B Valley ballast car yet. There is the E&B Valley ballast car. And the day I painted that pine green, Bowser announced they were doing it. There's highball graphics decals on there. They went on wonderful. Speaking of improvements in the hobby, back in the day, the only thing you could get to reflect a Pullman standard 5344 cubic foot boxcar were the Athearn blue boxes. Thankfully now, Exactrail and Athearn RTR both do them. They're a wonderful car. You've even got better detail on them than the blue box. A custom painted Athearn blue box extended vision caboose, better represented by the Atlas version beneath it. And they're actually a peek on the workbench. You can see the modifications I'm doing by adding weight to the boxcars and whatnot, to the rolling stock there. And adhering to the prototype practice, it's 1983 and 1988. Guilford gets a guide around. But unit grain trains ran between Buffalo and here, Massachusetts. So unfortunately, because of the way the layout is, I can't really photograph it to reflect such, but trust me, that's a unit grain train on the right. We can at least see the head car on it. They also ran unit grain trains to the Port of Albany and Air on the D&H. The trains that went to Air were predominantly Burlington Northern and Streamline Comarch grain hoppers. The cars that went to the Port of Albany generally didn't have a road name on them, and they were just a reporting mark with ID. Top of my head, I don't know what cars those were, but they were just a generic bland gray grain car. Maine Central 802 was the last running RS11 on the Maine Central roster. They only had two. After Sunday, then Guilford came into formation, and 801 had already suffered a broken crankshaft and was out of service forever. The 802 migrated to the Delaware and Hudson and worked as the only auto yard switcher until the last remnant of the 10 division was closed, and then it migrated down to East Binghamton until it was retired. And it was used a lot as the yard switcher and on local power out of East Binghamton for a couple of years. Modeling prototype, I feel compelled to model actual locations. It's going to be difficult in the basement, so I'm naturally kind of maybe budget a little on the color proto-freelance Guilford layout. We weren't really intending on going after a look for East Deerfield, even though we call that yard that. But I happened to be looking one day from a certain angle, and I was like, gee, that kind of has a resemblance off the West End Bridge. If you look at it just right. East Binghamton, much looser representation. The shop is very truncated. The stand towers are in a polar opposite angle that they are in the prototype, because I'm a plus and I would have kept smacking off the stand towers all the time by reaching over for locomotives. However, Crow River Products makes a wonderful DL&W tower that makes a good representation of the East Binghamton Yard Tower. Obviously, I have to change the roof color to green. That is the one post-bankruptcy image I have in the program because that's the one that shows the tower the best. As a locomotive guy, I was never photographing buildings. Model railroads have history too. You know, like I said, when we first started out, we were doing anything goes. We've since modified the layout here and there, scenic it a little bit. That's Plywood Central right there with Crow River and an AHM tower. No ballast, no grass, no anything. It's kind of a misnomer in the photo on the right, but you know, you can kind of see a figure in there, some other stuff. And you know, I'm happy that my father took photos of most of the layouts he had going back to before I was born. And I wanted to set about documenting this one as much as I could, because I am planning on doing a new one. And what do I want from a new layout? Well, first and foremost, reliability, because frustration kills the enjoyment. You know, it's supposed to be a hobby. You're supposed to have come home after a bad day at work, put on the right layout, run trains. Right. It's supposed to have to fight it in NMRA this just to get them to cooperate. Getting to watch what I enjoyed growing up. Can't go up to the airfield and see TP-38s any fall. Probably can now with the Berkshire Eastern, but for a long time, you know, everything is homogeneous now. Most of what you see out there on your class ones are dark-colored, wide-nose locomotives. There's no variety anymore. The box cars are all high, huge, 60 foot. You know, hardly any TOs. For a long time, there's hardly any TOs. I'm seeing a little bit come down. But you know, your double-stack containers and 60-foot high-cube box cars, and then everything's covered in graffiti. And then, again, being inspired by the other layouts, share it on social media. Get the railfan angles on your layout. And, of course, continued obsessions with my friends. So what's next? Well, carefully store everything that's currently in use on the layout. The layout does run 3 to 7 days a week, I'm happy to say, depending on what my outside obligations are. Removal of the current layout and all the non-house systems from the basement. So all the books, magazines, the lantern collection that I inherited, the file cabinet of Rarityana. Make a finished basement. Build the Guilford Transportation Industries Freight Main Line in HO. And I'm very vague because I still haven't decided where between Air Mass and East Binghamton, New York, I want to set it. Because I like that entire stretch. But I don't have enough basement to fit it all. I have no timeline. I have no disposable income to invest in this right now. So when it's going to get done is anybody's guess. And thanks for coming. Thank you, Justus.
Yeah. Need to make me presenter again, I think. Or am I still? Oh, I'm sharing. I'm good. Okay. There you go. Okay, no. All right. Hi, my name is Justus. I'm from Middletown. I've got a layout that I have been building for the last 6 years, and a bunch of it came from my previous layout when I was a teenager, including a roundhouse that I built when I was a teenager, and so I decided I was going to do something with it. So this is my project to animate the doors on my roundhouse. So I built this Helgen 8-stall roundhouse kit in the 70s as a teenager, and then saved it when I had to move out of my mother's house. I wanted to keep the dust out of the bays, and so the doors, which were open because I can't get to them where it is on the layout, so I had to keep them open all the time. So I decided, why not make them open and close? Wanted to play with Arduino boards and learn about servos. And so I'm like, here's a perfect example of a project where I can put together Arduino servos and meet my goal of making the doors open and close. My layout is single operator. I don't do op sessions with it. Everything is run through my handheld NCE control. So I wanted to have the ability to use the NCE to open and close the doors. So I wanted the doors to be DCC controlled. And so I've got DCC, Arduinos, and servos. There's a roundhouse on my layout. It looks like it's nice and close. It is not reachable. You can't get to it from anywhere. I have a cutout panel that I can take out, but that makes it difficult to run the layout. So, desired features. I wanted to use DCC commands to make the doors open and close. I wanted to remember the door position. So if I turn the power off and turn the power back on, the doors wouldn't just flip, or, you know, if I had a locomotive part way out, I wanted the doors to stay open. I wanted to have push buttons on the fascia so that if I didn't have the remote, I could push a button to make a door open or close. I wanted the doors to open and close at a reasonable pace. I didn't want them to just snap open and snap close. So I wanted them to move open and then move closed. DCC, as I said, the doors open and close slowly. While the computer is doing that, it needs to be looking for DCC commands. So I had to figure out how to make the program both open and close the door slowly and look for DCC commands as they're coming in, so that you could do door, 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 and have them do one after the other. And I wanted to make each door work correctly. The servos aren't going to be in exactly the same position when I glue them in. The wires aren't going to be exactly the same length. The hinge pins on the doors aren't going to be in exactly the same place. And servos don't position exactly the same across each servo. So you get 8 servos and you give them all the same command. They're going to go to slightly different positions. So I needed a way to figure out what the positions were for each door and use each of those positions. Arduinos are a board that have AVR chips on them. The Arduino family of boards has been around for a while. They make a whole pile of different boards. The Uno, the Mini, the Nano, the Mega, and a whole pile of others. There are different voltages for the actual chip, depending on which board you get. So that's important. If you're interfacing it with other stuff, you need to get the right voltage. They build a software kit that you can install on your Mac or your Windows to write the code. They have 2, one for C or C++, and one for MicroPython. Depending on which language you know or like or want to learn, you can pick whichever one you want. Gives you the entire development environment to write your code and to then download that code to the Arduino chip. Once it's in the chip remembers it, and all you got to do is turn the chip on and away you go. There are also libraries that are all sorts of things that have been written by other people that you can download and install so you don't have to write the code. One of those is the NMRA DCC library. Great. Don't have to write the code to figure out how to read DCC packets. It's all right there. You can get cheap clone boards, Chinese knockoffs. They work great. In fact, I think the board that I brought is one of those. Or you can buy Arduino boards from the Arduino Foundation, and then you're giving money to the foundation. It's an open source foundation, so worth supporting it. The board features not just the AVR chip, but also voltage converters, so you can power the board with a different voltage than what the chip does, so you can give it like 7 to 12 volts. And LEDs, status LEDs, some reset buttons, connectors to put on other boards called shields, which are stackable boards. They have the different AVR chips, different number of pins depending on which board. So like the Mega has like 50 I/O pins, so you can run a whole pile of stuff with it. The Nano has like 15 pins, so it's much smaller. The pins are dedicated and multi-purpose. So some of the pins are digital, some of the pins can accept an analog, some of the pins are also used for a serial interface or the I2C bus, which is a nifty 2-wire bus that you can use to talk from the chips to other chips. And I use that in this project, which I will show you later. They also have built-in generators and timers so that you can use a timer to time things and not have to just sleep. or to look for functionality. They have interrupts so that you can have stuff come in and just interrupt your code when it's running, do something, and then return to your code. And the input and output pins are capable of driving an LED, which is really nice. You don't have to do anything extra. You don't need extra components. But you need to be careful. If you drive all your pins at the same time and you have all of them driving something at the maximum, you will overpower the chip. So think about how much current you're doing. You know, you can have every pin driving an LED, but don't have them all on at the same time. Here are examples of two of the different common boards. The Arduino Nano, it's about this big. It's, you can see it down there. I've got a setup which I can show you later, which shows all of this stuff. So the Nano is, you know, 1 3/4 inches long. The Uno is a bigger board, 2 1/4 by 3 inches. You can see on the boards, the large chip in the middle is the AVR chip. Then there are other components. There are the LEDs, the reset button, and on the left side of each board is the USB connector that you use to connect the board up to a PC or a Mac to download the program or to debug it. And you can also use it to power the board while you're doing development. So it's really nice to just plug it in, do something with it, and then unplug it. And then you can power it from either a regulated supply or from a higher voltage, and it will have the onboard regulator drop the voltage down for the chip. So they're incredibly versatile. And this is, I said, two of, I don't know how many boards there are. There are 20 or 50 boards. There's a pile of different boards. So now I've got the computer. Now I needed something to actually move the doors. And it had to fit inside the roundhouse so that it could not block the locomotives. So it had to be really small. So I started by looking at these little tiny linear servos. Does everybody know what a servo is and how they work? They're basically a little geared motor that moves something, and they know where they are position-wise. And you send them a signal, and they go to the position that matches the signal, and then they stay there. So I started with these little linear servos. They move back and forth. It's incredibly noisy and very imprecise. It was you would give it the signal, and it would go to an area near where you want it to be, but it wasn't good enough for opening and closing the doors. So then I tried a slightly better servo. These are also fairly small. This particular model is plastic gears. They are also very noisy, and you know, it's noisy enough that it was obnoxious when you're asking the doors to open or close. So I went on and moved on to the same physical size servo, but it is metal gears, and it's much, much quieter. And that actual servo is this thing. That's one of the servos. Very small. So then I needed a demo, some way to play with this without messing around with the whole roundhouse. The roundhouse, having been built, it's fairly large, it's bulky, it's, you know, mildly fragile, and I didn't want to be messing with it. So I happened to have one extra stall that I had built as a standalone stall. So I'm like, perfect, great way to experiment, to see what's going on. And I brought it so you can see what I did with it. So then I needed to mount the servos. I am the kind of person who likes to make sure that what I do is undoable. So I don't glue things down. Typically, I don't hard and fasten something. The servos, I wanted to be removable in case one broke or stopped working for some reason. They're not expensive, and so I'm not sure that they're going to be 100% reliable for the long term. So I wanted to be able to screw them down as opposed to glue them down. But they're going to be on the ceiling of the roundhouse, which is a very thin piece of plastic, and I don't want the screws going through the roof. So how do I do that? I decided that I had available some L-channel aluminum, and so I chopped up little pieces of it. I used tap and die to drill through it, and then tap for machine screws, cut a brass strip, drilled through that, and that let me put the servo on the L-channel and then use machine screws to mount the servo against the L-channel. I then cut the screws off flush with the bottom of the L-channel and that way I can glue the L channel to the ceiling and then put the screws in, and they'll just bottom out perfectly level. And if I ever need to replace the servo, I undo the screws, take the servo off, put another servo on, and put them back. Yes, sir.
Have those little foam strip isolators, or is it just mounted metal to metal?
They're mounted metal to metal. I could have done a foam strip. It might have quieted them down a little bit. Good point. So now I have the servos on the ceiling. How do I connect them to the door? I needed to, the first problem I had was that the kit was fairly old. When I built it, I wasn't super careful, and it had been bouncing around for a while, so some of the doors were partially broken, and some of the doors didn't move freely. I needed them to move relatively freely. So I looked around and discovered that I could buy a complete kit on eBay of that Helgen roundhouse. So it was reasonably priced. I bought a whole nother kit. And between the kit and playing with parts, I was able to replace the doors that were broken, free up the doors that were partially stuck, and get all 8 sets of doors, so 16 doors, moving freely, and all of the hinge points working reliably. Then I needed a way to actually connect the servo to the door. My first thought was I'll cut little bits of styrene and put a hole in it and glue it to the door. And so I did that with the little white piece. They're a pain to make, and I was going to have to make 16 of them, and I'm like, you know what? The wire is probably going to wear that out pretty quick because it's such a small piece of styrene. So I decided I didn't want to do that. So I then went on and replaced it with a piano wire made hinge point. And I just did that by wrapping a piece of piano wire around another piano wire and cutting it off. And then I take the tail end and I glue it into the door with some CA, and voila, I've got a nice metal point that I can use. Now I've got a hinge, I've got the servo, need to connect the servo to the hinge point. Piano wire seems like the obvious choice. The piano wire needs to have some give, but be stiff enough that it can push the door open. The give, because the servo might go a little over or a little under, and I don't want it ripping the doors off. So I decided I'd put a U in the wire. But that meant the wire has to be stiff enough for the U to work and not stiff enough for it to not work. In other words, it has to actually open and close and give a little bit, but I don't want it to give so much that the doors don't move, or, you know, so I played around with thicknesses of piano wire and the shape of the U, whether I wanted to do a full circle or just the U. And after some experimentation, I found that 0.20 wire worked beautifully with a U shape rather than a full circle, and that has just enough give that if the servo goes a little too much or a little over, it doesn't break anything, and it can reliably push the doors open. The doors also open more than 90 degrees, and so that meant the wire had to go around the door jamb a little bit. So there's a kink at the top you can see. Here, I've got this the wire is slightly away from the door, so when the doors are fully open, the wire is not rubbing against the door jamb. Then I need to figure out for each servo what the position was, and you can get this nice cheap servo adapter. Go into it, and you change the dial, and it moves the servo. And that way, after the servos were mounted, I could tune each one and see what the correct pulse width command was for fully open and fully closed for each of the individual sets of doors. And I can take that number that's off the front of the display, turn that into the number I need to drive the servo in the software, and program that into a table, which I will show you. And that's how I did the variations based on each door set. To drive the servos, you can drive them straight from the Arduino board. The AVR chips have pulse width modulation. I was going to have to drive 8. I wanted to use the Nano because I had it, and I decided that it would be easier to have an external servo driver board rather than using the pulse width modulation in the Arduino chip, or in the AVR chip on the Arduino board. Adafruit makes this really cool board. It'll drive 16 pulse width modulated things. You can use it for servos. You can use it to adjust the brightness on LEDs. It's really handy for that. And it happens to use the I2C bus to talk to the AVR chip. And as I mentioned earlier, the AVR chip has the I2C bus built in. Perfect. In addition, that allows me to put this board and the servos in the roundhouse, but put the Arduino card below it on the layout and have only a very few wires between the chip, the Arduino board, and this chip. So I didn't have to run every single servo wire down through the layout. And because I want to make sure I can remove it, I built a little plastic holder with some standoffs. So that is what's glued to the top of the roundhouse. And then I can screw this card to that. If the card ever fails for some reason, I can unscrew it, take it off, put a new card in. Then you need to read the DCC commands. Turns out it's really, really simple. Thanks to Dave Flackenberg's schematic, which you can find on the net anywhere. You take in DCC, you go through an opto-isolator, and out comes a pulse. And the pulse matches each rise of the DCC command, and you feed that into your Arduino, and the NMRA library reads those pulses, decodes the packets, gives you a packet. Trivial. It's a very few components. It's like 6 or 7 components, right? A couple of resistors, a couple of diodes, the opto-isolator chip, you're done. And because it's opto-isolated, you don't have to worry about voltage spikes or anything on your track because the Arduino is not seeing any of that. So here's what the whole thing looks like. DCC in, feeding the Arduino Nano card, the I2C bus going to the PCA board drives the servos. DCC and Arduino are below the layout. The PCA and the servos are mounted into the ceiling of the roundhouse. I like drawing schematics to know what I'm going to wire up. There's a free schematic program specifically designed for doing electronics, incredibly powerful. I use 2% of it to draw this schematic. It's KiCad. As I say, it's free download. The upper left corner yellow box is the opto-isolator. The yellow box in the middle is the Arduino Nano board. And then the whole rest of it, the right-hand side and the lower left, is the PCA card kind of disassembled so you can see how it works, but that's all that card. And this shows how all of the wires are connected up. And if you look in the middle, all Arduino Nano board. Then I breadboarded it, and that's what the breadboard looked like. And I bought the breadboard later. So the card standing up is the PCA card. The blue card that's horizontal is the Nano. And as you can see, there are not a lot of jumpers, just a few parts. And that is a working model of the entire system. I can hook up 8 servos to it and make, press the button or send it a DCC command, and it'll make the servos move. And I have that here and can demo it if you want to see later. Then I need to build it to mount it. I didn't want to spend the money on a printed circuit board, so I just got a perf board, pre-made perf board, and soldered various parts to it. I put in sockets for the Arduino and screw terminals for the various wires, and there are a few wires that connect the chips to each other. You can see some wires for the power and some wires connecting the chips to each other, but it's such a simple circuit that it was very, very simple to do. The top connector with the gray and brown is the DCC coming in. The bottom connector with the yellow and white is the I2C bus going out. The red and black are power to the board itself, and then power from the board to the PCA card. And the green wire is an enable wire. Software. You need to download the IDE. As I said, I chose the C++ IDE. It's free on the Arduino website. You just go down there and you download it. Once you've installed it, you need to install the libraries. You find the NMRA library, you download that. You search for the Adafruit P pulse width modulation servo driver for the PCA card, you download that. it automatically asks you if you want to install the I2C bus, which is they call bus IO. So you say yes, and if you forget, you can just search for the Adafruit bus IO and download that. And that's all the software you need. You've now got the library to drive the card, you've got the library to read the DCC packets, and you're ready to go. You just have to glue it together. The way an Arduino chip works, there's a setup routine, and you need to use that to do one-time things that you're only going to do once at power on. And then there's a loop, and the loop runs forever. And you do whatever you want to repeat in the loop. And then for the DCC packet, there's an interrupt routine that gives you the DCC packets when they're available. So you don't have to do anything. You have to call some code periodically to process it, but the interrupt routine is just called when there's a packet available. In the setup, you set up the I/O pins, which pins are input, which pins are output. I2C is output. Pins looking for button presses are inputs. You set up the PCA card so that you can send it commands. You set up the NMRA library. What pin is the interrupt from the opto isolator? What kinds of commands are you going to look for, etc. And then I initialize the servos so that the doors are in the position that they want to be in, open or close. The loop calls the DCC processing routine. This is a routine that's sort of processing packets in the background, but it doesn't do anything. It's that interrupt routine that actually hands you the packets when they come in. Then I've got some debugging code, look for door minimum and maximums, and it lets me play. That code can all be commented out for the final version. Then I check for button presses. Are any of the buttons pressed? If yes, add a command to open or close that door. Check for commands in the queue. And I'll get to why I'm doing it in a queue in a minute, but I'll look for a command in the queue, which is a door command. I want to open or close the door. If there's nothing in the queue, I just go back to the top of the loop, and the loop sits there doing that. If there is a command in the queue, then I call a routine to do the door opening or closing. And the door opens or closes, and while it's opening or closes, it's also looking for button presses, and it's looking for new DCC commands. So, you get the libraries, not great documentation. You can Google what they're doing. You need to learn enough about them. They're source code, so you can read them. You can see what they're doing. You can use them as programming examples. There are some header files that will give you some information. Some of them have readmes. You can look at the readme. I did all of that for the NMRA library to start with, and found out that I needed to define what pin was the interrupt from the opto isolator, and define that. And then also I needed to tell the library what kind of a command I'm looking for. So the first line of code is the DCC.pin. It sets the interrupt pin. And the second is the DCC interrupt, and it says what kind of a command I'm looking for. And as you can see in the middle, I'm looking for accessory decoder commands. You do that once, and then every accessory decoder command that comes across DC will call that interrupt routine, and you can look to see whether it's a command that you want to deal with or if it's for some other object, and ignore it. Also need to set up the PCA card. There's an enable on it, so I set one pin for the enable disable, and then you need to set beginning and some oscillator frequencies, and then the actual pulse width modulation frequency. Servos run between 50 and 60 hertz. I set mine at 50. Some people say you should set it at 60. It doesn't really matter. The width of the pulse is what servos care about. They don't care about the frequency per se. So as long as they're in a range that they're looking for, you're good. Reading the DCC packets. There is a notify DCC accessory turnout command that is called automatically by the interrupter code when there is a fully formed, ready to go DCC packet. So when that is called, there's a packet for you. And so the first thing you do is you take the address and you see if it's an address that you care about. In my case, I had a min door and a max door set up, and that's the two addresses that for the first door and the last door. If the address is between those, it's for me. I want to do something with it. If it's not for me, I don't care. I just return. The next thing I do is to see if the packet is the same as the last one, right? DCC often repeats packets. So I look to see if the address is the same as the last address, the direction is the same as the last direction, and there's this output power option. I've never figured out what that does, but it needs to be on for the command to be valid. So I look for those three things. If it's the same address, same direction, and where the power is out, I don't care. I've already done it. If it's a different address or a different direction where the power's on and the power's on, then it's new. I want to do something with it. So I save the address, I save the direction, and then I add it to a stack. So you got this interrupt routine. The interrupt routine is saying, here's a packet. You got your loop going. Your loop is doing, I don't know what. It's opening a door. It's doing nothing. It's looking for a button press. How do I interface between that interrupt and the main loop? My way to deal with it was to have a queue, a stack. It's actually a queue. And the interrupt routine simply drops the command onto the queue, and then it returns. That's all it does. And then in the main loop, one of the things the loop does is look to see, is there a command in the queue? If there's no command in the queue, I don't have to do anything. If there's a command in the queue, it's new for me, and that decouples that interrupt routine from the main loop. And the main loop can handle it in an orderly fashion when it's ready to deal with it. So the interrupt routine here simply takes the address and the direction and sticks it in the queue, increments the queue, and on we go. Same thing with the button press. If the when I call a routine, it just goes through all 8 buttons. If any of the buttons are pressed, then I stick a command in the queue. The button presses are independent of what else is going on, and I decided that what I wanted the button press to mean was toggle the door. Whatever state it's in, I just want it to flip to the other state. So I actually have a third direction. So one direction is open, one direction is closed, and the third direction is toggle. And the mainline code says, okay, if it's open, I'll open it. If it's closed, I'll close it. If it's toggle, I'll take whatever position it's in now and I'll flip it. That way I don't have to worry about having a switch that's up or down. If somebody's doing DCC commands at the same time somebody's pushing buttons, it doesn't cause massive chaos. So that's how I handled it. And then I again stick the command into the queue. So the mainline loop is still simple. All it does is look for a command in the queue. If there's a command in the queue, execute it. So button presses and DCC commands both feed into the queue, and then the mainline loop takes that and says, there's something nice to do. So what does the mainline loop do? Calls the DCC background processing, looks to see if one of the toggle buttons is pressed, checks to see if there's a command in the queue, and if there's a command in the queue, open or close the door, and repeat. That's it. It's a really simple mainline code. It just does that over and over and over again, and probably 99% of the time, it's finding nothing to do, and it's just sitting there in a loop. So what does a loop do? Starts by calling the DCC process. This is a background job, doesn't do anything that you need to worry about. It's making sure that the DCC commands are being pulled in and assembled correctly, and when they're ready to go, it'll call your interrupt routine, but this routine does not actually do anything that you need to deal with. Then I need to check for button presses. Buttons are mechanical devices. When you push them, they actually bounce. The contacts don't do that, they do, right? So in an electronic world, if you're looking for a button press and you're looking at it at electronic speed, you're actually going to see that bounce as multiple opens and closes. And that would show button push. And you've probably all dealt with cheap electronic crap where you push the button and it does twice or 3 times, right? Or it doesn't do it at all and then it does it 3 times. That is called key bounce, and you need to deal with that. So what I do is I only look for the button presses once every quarter second. That way, if a button is closed and I see it closed, I'm not even going to check it again for another quarter of a second. So if it bounces a bunch of times, I don't care. I do that by putting in a delay. And again, because I'm processing the DCC packets, you can't just go to sleep. The Arduino has a nice sleep function. You can say, go to sleep for X amount of time. It just stops for a little while. Doesn't do anything until the sleep period is over. You can't do that because now you're not processing the DCC packets. If there's another button press, you're not seeing that. So how do I handle that? Arduinos, the AVR chip, have a built-in timer, a clock, and the clock just counts. And it does it in milliseconds or microseconds. I do it in milliseconds. So I just look to see, have I gone a quarter of a second worth of milliseconds? And I'm running around doing other things, and periodically I'll check, have I gone another quarter millisecond? Am I another quarter of a second of milliseconds? And that way I'm processing, I'm running, but I'm also not doing anything until a millisecond counter gets up to a quarter second. And that debounces my buttons. So I get the door buttons and stick them on the queue, just like getting a DCC packet. And again, it's exactly the same, except that because of the toggle, I'm now looking to see, is this a toggle command or a direction command? So if there's a command in the queue, I get the address, and note I subtract the door number from the address. The addresses are the DCC addresses. In my case, it's 114 to 122. The doors are not up in the hundreds. I don't have that big a roundhouse. So the door numbers start at 0. So I need to subtract the door address from the minimum door address so that I go 0 to 8 or 0 to 7 in my case, rather than going 114 to 122. And then I look to see if it's a toggle command, and if it is, I get the current position out of the EEPROM. The EEPROM is the memory on the chip. And I look to see if the door is currently marked as open or closed, and I flip it. So if the door is currently open, I set it to close. If it's currently closed, I set it to open. And take the command off the queue. Then I look to see, do I need to do something with this command? So I check the current door position against the direction that I'm being asked to change. If they match, I don't have to do anything. The door's already already open. It's already closed. If they don't match, then I need to move the door. So the first thing I do is I save the new position. That way, if the power goes down, the door will be in the position that I want when I turn the power back on. Then I check by table. And remember, I talked about they're all unique. Here's the table that I calculated for my door positions. And you can see the variation in the actual pulses that you want to send for the different servos. There's quite a variety here, right? You got all the way from 404 all the way down to 372 or 414 for the close. That's quite a range. So it really needs to be unique per each door. Then you need to decide how you're going to process the command. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the servo and I'm going to give it go to position open, and then position open +1, +2, +3, +4, all the way up to position closed, or the other way around. If it's closed, then I'm going to go from closed to open. And I'm going to do it one at a time with a delay in order to get that nice gentle open and close, rather than just giving it open to close and having the servo go wonk. I don't want the doors to just go wonk. I want them to go right? A little bit more realistic. So I take the table values for open and close, and the code is written so that I don't care which way I start. If I'm going to open, I go from open I go from closed to open. If I'm going to close, I go the other way around. Same values, different direction. Then I decide, am I going up or am I going down? Am I going to make the servo go higher or lower? And I set direction to 1 or -1. That way I can use direction as the direction to go, and I don't care. Am I going up or down? It's going to be either count up or count down, and I can just add it. And I add it, and if I'm adding and it's negative, I'm counting down. If I add it and it's positive, I'm going up. So I take the pulse start and pulse end. I get my millisecond timer. Again, I'm not actually going to go to sleep between the pulses to the servo. I'm going to look for the counter to go up so I can be doing stuff in the loop. And then I set the servo set pulse width modulation to the current pulse count. And that count is going to slowly go up with a delay in between each increment, or slowly go down if the door is going the other way, again with a delay between each increment. And I can then process button pushes, and I can process the DCC packet while I'm in that moving the door open or closed. and I rinse and repeat. So I'm done. So there's other code in the main loop. I've got some debugging code in there. I can actually look for commands from the USB if I'm plugged into a USB that can do things like set and change the door positions for experimentation purposes. All of that is extra. None of it is functionally necessary when you're actually running this, but it's there. I can comment it out and make it go away if I want, or I can leave it in. It's currently in, and I can show you if you're interested. So some of the things I thought about while I was writing all this, as I mentioned, I want the doors to open and close in a way that is not instantaneous. I want them to slowly open and slowly close, but you got to call the DCC packet processing frequently, which means you can't just go to sleep. So I had to use the millisecond timer to do counts and do delays that way. Button checking, I needed to check every button, but again, I need to use the millisecond delay counter in order to do button debounce so that you're not seeing the button bounce open and close. And I wanted to use the EEPROM storage on the chip. It's sort of like a built-in USB stick to save the door position so that when you turn the layout off and turn the layout on, the doors are in the same position. Some enhancements that I've thought about and haven't done. I can add code to allow the addresses of doors to be programmed by sending DCC commands to the CV values. So you can actually program the board like you program CVs in a locomotive. I could change the debugging code to set the minimum and maximum and save those in the EEPROM rather than compiling them into the code. Didn't do that. This is a one-off, like, why bother? I could add code to allow setting them in the minimum and maximum via DCC CV commands. Also didn't bother to do that. Again, this is a one-off. If I was building a commercial product that I was going to sell to people, I might do that. And then I could say, okay, you mount your servos and then you set CV values based on where your doors are. And then the final piece would be to modify the code to allow doors, multiple doors, to be in the process of opening or closing at the same time. So right now that loop says, is there a command? Yes, open the door or close the door. But if there's two commands to open or close the door, you got to wait for the door to finish opening or closing before the next door starts opening and closing. I could modify the code so that you could have two commands working at once, and you could have one door start to move, and then a second door start to move, and maybe even a third door start to move. And so you'd have multiple doors moving at the same time. Doesn't do that. It waits for the first door to finish moving before it goes on to the second door or the third door. Note that because I'm looking at the interrupts all the time, and I'm using a static, I can send multiple open or close commands while it's busy doing a door, and it will see those, remember them, and when the first door finishes, it'll start working on the second door, even though the command was sent during the first door's operation. But it won't actually start moving the door until the first door is done. And then some other fun projects that I've done with the Arduinos. I built a speedometer for the layout. It's got a couple of opto isolators on the track about 20 inches apart. The Arduino looks at the two of them. When it sees a train cross the first one, it starts counting. When it gets to the second one, it stops counting, displays on an LCD that's mounted in the fascia, the time, total time, and the scale miles per hour. So I can tell, if the locomotive goes over, I can see, is it going 20 miles an hour, is it going 30 miles an hour, whatever. I also built a bunch of relay cards using the DCC logic, but instead of outputting it to a servo, I just output it to a relay. And then the relays can do anything you want. So you can use DCC commands to turn a relay on or off. And I have several of those around the layout. Right now, they're mostly hooked to various lighting circuits. So the street lights, the building lights, the station lights, the yard lights are all hooked to these boards. And from my NCD control, I can turn on or off the lights for the town, or for the station, or for the yard. Very cool, very simple. Again, it's an Arduino, a board, you're done. That's my presentation. Questions? Yes, sir.
You recommend someone actually very impressed with the engine. It's awfully complicated. Is there a simple way to get forwards without program?
To use an Arduino, you need to program because you have to write the code to run on the board. There are a billion YouTube videos, books, Arduinos for dummies, classes on free. There's a ton of information out there on how to program generically. And the Arduinos, as I said, you can use MicroPython or you can use C++. So you can pick whichever language you want to learn. They're very different languages, and the way you write them is very different. I know C. I've known C since I was a teenager, so that's what I did. Python is an up-and-coming language that many people are using for all sorts of things. I don't have an opinion whether you want to learn C or Python. You're going to have to learn a language. The boards themselves are just pieces of electronics, and any electronics course is going to help you learn how to use them. They wind up with, I/O pins that have voltages. You got to know how to deal with the voltages. You got to know how to deal with milliamps and not overpower them. I mentioned that each pin can drive 20 milliamps, but the chip itself can only draw 200. If you had every pin on it driving an LED at 20 milliamps, you would be putting out more than 200 milliamps, so you'd burn out the chip. You need to learn that stuff. Again, there's a million courses out there. There's a million YouTube videos. There's self-help. Find a friend. Find somebody who's willing to help you. I'm a computer science major in college. That's what I did. But I know a lot of people. My brother-in-law is an English major, and he's a programmer now. It's not something that. It's something that pretty much anybody can learn. And yes, it's going to take some effort. But what in our hobby doesn't take some effort if you want to do it well? Yep.
Good point is that's why we're doing a higher solar. A programmer, so by Justus Addis. It's all a private meeting or something.
Yep. My contact information is up on the screen. Yes, sir.
Commercial Arduino programmer. So you don't have to learn the code.
No. That's part of the point is you have to write the code to make it do what you want it to do. So the IDE is the programmer, but you have to write the code that the IDE then downloads to the chip. Right? I mean, you have to have some way of telling the chip, I want you to look at these pins in this order. Based on those, I want you to output this information. That's the whole point of programming the chip is getting the chip to do something for you, right? So it's no different than your microwave. You want your microwave to do something, you got to push in the instructions on it and then hit go. The Arduinos, the AVR chips are just like any other computer. You got to tell it what you want to do. It's the same thing as you want to do an Excel spreadsheet and you want to automate some stuff. You got to do formulas. What does it do? You got to tell it. You got to write the formulas, right? Word macros, same thing. You want Word to automate some stuff, you got to write some Word macros. How do you want it to do? What do you got to tell it. So, can you do this with ChatGPT? Yeah, you can say to ChatGPT, I want an Arduino program written in C that will do the following. And if you're specific enough, it'll output, ChatGPT will tell you, here's some code that is probably pretty close to what you want, or might even be what you want. So in that sense, yeah, you could use something like ChatGPT to write the code for you.
And they have articles that say, here's how you send it up to take it. Please add it to like that little display screen that built into like some of these TVs, lighting, or things like that. And on those projects, if you want to do it, you use this code.
And in fact, when you install the Arduino IDE, it comes with several hundred sample scripts that you can just pick and put. The most basic one is blink the LED on the board. And most Arduinos actually come with that already built in. So if you plug it in, the first thing that happens is it sits there with a LED blinking. But the code to do that is right there. So you have a sample of what it took to make that happen. You can see the setup routine, you can see the main routine, you can see them setting the output pin to output for that LED, and then doing some timing and turning the pin on and off and on and off, and that the code's right there, along with a whole crap load of other stuff. Yeah.
For commissioning the server, right, you said you forgot about
Yep.
Are there in-stops on the servo that you could just do that to the board, or you have to know different one that makes it different?
In my case, the answer is complicated. Servos have end stops. If you command them past the end stops, they tend to self-destroy. So that's the first problem. Yeah, there's a hard end stop, and then they typically have 180 degrees for normal servos. But if you give them a command that tells them to go to 190 degrees, they're sort of going to try it. The other problem that is my doors are not going anywhere near minimum and maximum on the servo, right? They're a very short distance of the servo motion. They're moving maybe 30 degrees out of that 180. So I'm not going to any stop at all. I'm going to what the door needs to open or close to. For instance, that servo opens doors 440 as opposed to 0-4096. Right? So they're telling you 0-4096 is the 30 degrees, 180 degrees. I'm using a very small amount of it. Eventually, I want you to demo any of this. I can turn it on and plug it in and plug it into the laptop. I bought a complete system. This is a case built by Dave. Science built by Dave. Arduino Mega. They motor driver board on it. And LCD. All available online. You just put it together. The code is downloadable with the DCC-TX folks. They put everything you need to install it. You want to use in programming. You plug it together, you hook it up, and you have a complete function. Live, or you can use the Wi-Fi by getting a MyShow board, and you put the bottom on your cell phone, hook it up, and voila. Depending on how much board you have on your hand, there's a number of $4 for completely the track.
The boards are perfect.
The boards are very good. The makeup swans are like $25. The makeup are $40. The power driver board, I can drive power, is the bus from the phone. The Wi-Fi bar is another $41. When you want to have your time to do that, you need a power device. You might have a $48, which is $50 on it. Or anything other. It's right there. It's designed for you, okay? And there you are. That's complete. It's great. And I use it mostly for programming. That is not running my railroad. I have an NCE system to run my railroad. I do use it for programming. The NCC has a problem with programming, in my opinion, which is that every time you put it in programming track mode, it turns off the main power on the main track. Well, if you've got a layout full of stuff, every time you program something, it turns the power off and on when it's done off and on, off and on. So you have power on your whole layout. It's going up and down and up and down and up and down. It's crazy. So I actually disconnect the programming, the main line from the NCE, but that's a pain. And I have two boosters, so I got to go and turn off both. I wanted a separate programming system. NMRA is what I use to program locomotives. This works beautifully and very inexpensive. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.